Hey y'all, so in this video what we're going to do is we're going to review the principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion like we covered them together in our intensives, and for any new members of your team to be introduced to these foundational principles that shape how you create belonging within your organization, as well as how you shape the impact that you make with those that you interact with. So we're going to go over those JEDI principles, and you can talk with your teammates, review with them, and make sure that you all are keeping up with this conversation to keep these principles alive in your organization. So let's check them out. I know it's really important to your organization to be cultivating, to be practicing the principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's really, it's just time for us to be able to have these conversations and engage with this stuff. And I think, as you'll see, we really believe that these principles are not just something that's difficult and hard, but it's actually something that brings a lot of meaning and beauty to the work that we do. So let's go ahead and dive into the principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and practices that you and your team can put into place to have those principles living in your organization. So as you listen to this video, I want to make sure that you're kind of learning with me through application. So take a moment right now. We're actually going to give you 3 minutes. And what I want you to do is reflect on a single situation or instance, an interaction or relationship that you could use as a practice scenario. And as you learn these principles and tools today, I want you to just be thinking about, okay, how would I put that into place? And the reason that I'm having you do this is because I don't want you to receive this as concepts, right? I want you to really put yourself inside of what I'm sharing with you so that it lives for you as something that you can put into action. So it moves beyond the intellect. So take a few moments right now and just write down, what is a situation, interaction, or relationship which you could practice a new set of tools for creating a more inclusive and supportive environment? And on a scale of 1 to 10, make sure that this is not something that's higher than a level 6 difficulty. So not your parents, not, the president of a country or some major thing, something that's like a 6 on the difficulty-o-meter. All right? Go ahead. So, justice as principle and practice. This is our first of the 4 principles. The definition that I've created for justice is a state of integrity and wholeness achieved through healing or transformation. Justice is a state of integrity and wholeness achieved through healing or transformation. Now, what this implies to us is that injustice is a state where there is no integrity and the wholeness has somehow been compromised. That wholeness might represent in relational wholeness, the sense of connection and belonging, but it also might be a literal physical wholeness. There might have been harm or damage that occurred to a person, place, or thing. So justice in that case can only be achieved if that injustice has already happened, if that integrity or wholeness has been compromised through healing or transforming the situation. If something has been broken, if someone has been harmed, that needs to be healed, needs to be repaired or amended. And sometimes we want to go even deeper to actually transform the individuals or the system that was involved such that that justice is restored. So when the principle of justice is present through certain practices, people can trust that their lives, their safety, and their well-being are valued by a community and cared for by their team and society. This is really essential because when people can trust that their lives, safety, and well-being are valued and cared for, you can imagine that the way that they show up is very, very different. Justice recognizes the sovereignty of every being as worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. So when justice is present, it is a given. Everyone who is here is recognized and treated with dignity and respect. Approaches to justice. Approaches to justice. There are a few different ways people go about justice, such as punitive justice. You may have heard of punitive justice because that's the majority of how our justice system works here in the United States. Essentially, it's saying to us, there's a punishment for doing something bad or wrong. For example, you broke my window. You will pay a fine or go to jail. The intention behind punitive justice, of course, is to deter people from doing crime by having repercussions or punishment that feels worse than, the risk, or not worth the risk that you're taking to do that crime. Whether or not that works is still to be determined. Another approach to justice is restorative justice. Restorative justice is based on the premise of restoring the situation to the original state or making up for the loss. So where you might pay a fine that goes to the state or goes to another situation, here if there was any kind of reparation, right, repairing, restoring, if there was a reparation being paid, rather than it going to another entity, it would go directly to the people who were affected or to the maybe even place or ecosystem or land that was affected by the harm. But it also might be a restoration or a healing that occurs through communication, through certain activities, through psychotherapy or medical healing. So you're trying to restore things to the original state as much as possible. So, bringing back that same example, you broke my window, you will fix my window. If you break it, you buy it. These are examples of restorative justice. Transformative justice. Changing the conditions and causes of harm at the root. We are seeking to heal and transform as many people involved as possible. Transformative justice is considered by some as a newer approach to justice, but we can see in many different cultures and indigenous traditions around the world, there are many of these practices that are really aimed at not just healing, but moving beyond that, not just restoring to the state that it was, but bringing things even more resilient and in a superior state than where they were before they began. Sharon Salzberg is known for saying that the healing is in the return, not in never having veered. Transformative justice recognizes that in that time of harm, there are systems that are much, much older than that exact instance. And by addressing those root causes, we can really make a difference. So in your organization, this might look like, okay, you did XYZ, but what are the underlying systemic challenges or issues that might have led you to that, right? You may go into that person's life and their experiences that they've had growing up, oppression that they may have experienced or trauma, but you might even just look at more modern and kind of in that very moment what was going on. For example, with our window, why are people throwing windows in the first place? And just throwing windows. Why are people throwing bricks to break windows? And why are the windows made of glass? Maybe they should be made out of unbreakable glass, bulletproof glass. Maybe we need to improve the situation so that windows aren't breaking in the first place. So transformative justice is often a little bit more energy intensive because it requires you to do a much deeper dive, but the results that you're going to produce are much more powerful. And that's the power of transformative justice, transforming the situation that may not have been really just to begin with. One important thing about transformative justice is that it seeks to take us out of the victim triangle. The victim triangle you may have heard of, where there is a victim, there is a oppressor or a perpetrator, and then there is the hero or the savior. Unfortunately, this victim triangle has been found through a lot of psychological and sociological study to really leave everyone losing. The victim is never really seen or recognized for their power, and thus may not have the opportunity to come into their power and reclaim the agency that they may have been lost in that interaction, because they're relying on the hero and always seeing the perpetrator as the one who held the power in that situation. The perpetrator may be dehumanized in the process, and though the focus is often meant to be kept on the victim, it's important to also recognize the humanity of all characters in the story. And then finally, the hero is kind of given the victim's power. And so that hero very often becomes a perpetrator later in the story because all of the power has been relinquished to that person. So it's kind of a mess. No one wins. So transformative justice really sees that, yes, if there's someone who has experienced more harm than others, they should be centered in that process. And everyone in the situation has to be recognized as a sovereign being who has power, has their own inherent or internal power, and that power should be restored to the person who has had it lost or has had it dishonored. Stepping towards justice. So we have designed a few steps that you might take towards cultivating justice, either in an instance where injustice has occurred, or if you just generally feel like we could use a little more justice here. Now, these steps are not going to necessarily be linear, but this might be a good starting point. So as you hear me share these, I want you to return to your example situation and imagine what would it be like to take each of these steps or try a variation of these steps towards cultivating more justice. The first one is acknowledging and taking responsibility, meaning being response-able. If you are able to respond, you are response-able. So if you find that a promise has not been kept, can you acknowledge that that promise was not kept? When harm occurs, can we acknowledge harm was done, harm occurred, and who is able to respond, who was in that situation able to ensure that harm did or did not occur? And when the results that we've produced don't reflect our integrity, this one is a little more subtle but equally important because it happens most often. Are the results that I'm producing reflecting of my integrity or our integrity? Does it reflect who we really are? That's why it's so helpful to have something like your standards of integrity or to have your values and principles, because these become those measures. How can you be accountable if you don't have something to take account according to? The word accountability has been used a lot and it can feel very heavy, but really to be accountable is to be count-onable. To take account is to say, this is what we said, this is what happened, and does those two things match? So, do the results we've produced reflect our integrity? The second step is cleaning up the mess. And we always recommend for you to start, if you can, on your side of the street. When I say if you can, I don't mean if you want to. I mean, are you safe in that exact moment to be able to pause and look? If you are being, if you are in danger of any kind, then you don't need to pause and think, well, how did I get myself into this situation? You can think about that after you have gotten yourself out of danger. Please, get yourself out of danger first. But 99% of the time, we're going to find that we can look in a relationship, in a conversation, in an interaction, right? When we're talking about justice, we're not just talking about these extreme examples. We're talking about the day-to-day interactions and relationships we have with the people we love. Are we being a stand for justice in our lives? Can I look at my side of the street first? Can I clean up my side of the street first? You may have heard from your grandma or another wise person, you can't change other people. Well, so far, we found that that's pretty true. You can try to influence their behavior, but where your true power lies is always with your own actions and your own perception. So, can I clean up my side of the street? That will then set you up to be able to either support or encourage or enforce other people to clean up their side of the street. You might take a moment to reflect now. What are some actions you can take to cultivate justice internally or externally, meaning within your organization or with those that your organization interacts with?